Bona tarda a tothom. Em sentiu? Sí, oi? Perfecte. Doncs benvinguts, benvingudes a aquesta 7ª edició del Mobile Social Congress, aquest congrés per un model electrònic just que impulsa 7M Catalunya i on avui el que farem serà posar una mirada crítica i molt necessària pel que fa a la indústria tecnològica, al consum de productes tecnològics, aquest origen tècnic i tecnològic que el que fa és, veurem durant tot el dia d'avui, aquesta tarda, des del principi fins al final, quins són els diferents problemes que ens anem trobant ètics i de producció pel que fa a aquesta mena de productes. Primer de tot, aquest congrés el que farem serà posar, com diu aquí, la tecnologia al servei de la vida. Una cosa molt important que sovint ens passa, així em sentiu millor, oi? Val. Projectes alternatius que descobrirem o que posen la tecnologia al servei de la vida. Sentireu paraules com sobirania tecnològica, com sostenibilitat, com aquest benefici de les persones, posar la tecnologia al benefici de les persones i no només, com pensem sovint, la nostra com a consumidor, sinó de tot el procés des del principi fins al final del que és aquest circuit i aquest sistema de producció de productes d'origen tecnològic. Per què la tecnologia al servei de la vida? Doncs ahir vam poder sentir algunes d'aquestes xerrades on el que fèiem era posar la tecnologia al servei.
Yesterday we heard some sessions on placing technology at the service of life. We talked about the fragility of the semiconductors, which I'm sure you've heard very often because this is something that has affected Taiwan that we were mentioning yesterday, also on the shelves in our supermarkets, because this has fully affected us. We also talked about socially responsible public procurement, and they focused on Amazon. It has many weak links, and today we'll hear more about Amazon for sure. And this was one of the other topics we discussed when we were looking at union-busting practices, and it's a very hot topic in talking about technology, focusing first in the US and then in the Philippines, where we were able to discuss government repression against unions. So if you missed out on yesterday's talks, they will soon be available on the website of the Mobile Social Congress. So what are we here for today? Well, first we will be discussing the importing and exporting of labor conditions in factories of these products. We'll first turn to Southeast Asia, and then we will look at the factories in Central and Eastern Europe. That'll be until 6 p.m. From 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., we will be discussing the myths of the green transition. We'll be talking about greenwashing, electric vehicles, the impact of lithium mines in Serbia. Lithium, we could say, is the main ingredient for electric car batteries. And we will also hear of innovative projects such as car battery recycling, which is a project led by Antonio Dorado from the UPC in Manresa. This is something here in Catalonia. We'll talk about technology as an ally or an enemy. That will be from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. It's this classical discussion on how governments can invade our privacy, and so do companies, and we'll focus on cyber activism and technology empowerment in Africa. And that'll be after an interview with Rutvica from the University of Bristol, and we will be hearing from her about labor conditions in the technology factories in Eastern and Central Europe. She is a researcher from the University of Bristol, and we will give her the floor very soon. Oh, one important thing. She already knows about this, but I'll ask her some questions. And if you have any questions, please raise a hand. We'll give you a mic so that at the end of each intervention, you can ask the questions you may have for Rutvica, okay? So Rutvica, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Is my mic working? Not really, no.
Una mica m'ha de sentir, no? Tell me
Oh, I can hear you now.
Problemes tècnics que
Oh,
passen.
wait, no. If you face, when you face like this, I cannot hear you. If you face front, I can hear you.
Okay. So now you
That's
can
good.
hear me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
That's
So
good.
now you can hear me, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Which are the main difference between working in a factory, in an electronic factory in Southeast Asia, and in a factory in the Central Europe and Eastern Europe?
Okay, let me start. Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Let me start from somewhere else. It's like when I tell people that I research electronics factories in Central and Eastern Europe, everyone goes, "What? There are electronics factories in Central and Eastern Europe?" And I go, "Yeah." And I just want to tell you where they are and why they're important to us, and then kind of we can look into details and differences. So there was not much going on important on a global scale in Central and Eastern Europe before 89, and then I don't know if you remember, but then 89, 90s, this is where Philips and Siemens expand to Eastern Europe. So this is mid 90s, and following that, we got Asian firms that start coming to Central and Eastern Europe. And this is the beginning of 2000, okay? And it is from there on that Central and Eastern Europe gets inserted into the global electronics scene, right? And it becomes what we call like a second tier global locations in the electronics industry. So the countries that are important for us today are Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and these are the biggest hubs of the export oriented electronics assembly in Central and Eastern Europe. But I wanna, can I show an image? Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, let me see if I can do that.
De fàbriques estan a Hongria, a Polònia, a la República Txeca, i que molta gent es sorprèn que n'hi hagi a Europa, i explicava que arribaven des dels 2000. Ens compartirà aquesta.
Does this work?
Ja té preparada.
Okay, so this is just to give you an idea of Hungary quickly. So this is not a couple. There's like, those countries are really integrated in the electronic supply chain. And I think this just gives you a quick idea. But what I really like to tell you is that we usually, when we think about electronics assembly, we think Southeast Asia, we think China, especially mainland China, but the companies have been thinking differently. When the Taiwanese companies came to Central and Eastern Europe in 2000, they specifically targeted Czech Republic, okay? And they have seen the Czech Republic, and moving into Eastern Europe, they had this, what they call the design of the golden wings, okay? So the idea is that you have the main production body in mainland China, okay? And then you have the two wings that support that body, and one is in Eastern Europe, and it's geared towards the end market of Western Europe, and the other one is in kind of Mexico, Latin America, and that is geared towards the US. So that is, I think that is really fascinating for us in the way. And what was really important why they came also to Central and Eastern Europe is that it shortened what is called the lead time from China to Western Europe from 22 days to 2 days. So this is all about kind of achieving flexibility and the speed when we think in broader kind of global terms. I think what is, in terms of workforce, what I wanted you to do is to think about Eastern European factories not as opposed to factories in Southeast Asia or in mainland China, but part of a kind of global distribution of factories to achieve specific flexibility and conditions of productions. And what also interests me is about workers, and I think this is quite interesting and specific to Central and Eastern Europe, that if the factories are after achieving speed and flexibility, then how do they do that? We know that traditionally firms segment the workforce. So they have what they call core workforce, which is directly hired, and then temporary workforce that is hired through the agencies. And the agencies are extremely prominent in Central and Eastern Europe. So these are formal agencies. These are not your informal recruiters, like very often in Southeast Asia. These are formal agencies that are registered and that they operate cross-nationally. And if you think about how factories operate, you have moments of very high demand when you need lots of workers, and then you have periods of low demand when the factories kind of want to lose workers. They want to shed some of the workforce. And this is where the agencies come in. So they bring that workforce, and the agency workforce can be anything between 40 to 60%, right? So this is not, oh, we miss few workers, let's kind of substitute them through the agency. This is very structural. And I think this is why it's also really important to us. But if you think that it is about bringing workers quickly in and then shedding workers, then that workforce has to be mobile, okay? And this is also quite a difference when we think in relation to Central and East, to Southeast Asia. So the workforce in Eastern Europe, these are EU workers, these are EU migrant workers. So if we think about factory in the Czech Republic, these workers would then come from Slovakia, they would come from Poland, they would come from Romania, Bulgaria. They would be mobile because they have the right to the free movement, which is extremely important. There would be some Croatians, and then there'll be other two groups that have special agreements through the government channels, and this would be the Ukrainian workers and the Serbian workers. In addition to this agency works, then you have the core workers that we go back to, and these are the national workers, but also then Vietnamese workers and Mongolian workers in Czech Republic, for example. So we see, I think what is really interesting for us, a very heterogeneous workforce which is hired through the agencies, and their status is that of having access to the right to the free movement.
Which kind of working conditions? Now we have perfectly understood how the system is built, but I would like to know once they have the job, what do they find?
So the working conditions once they have the job, right? Sorry, I hear you. I don't hear you perfectly well. So
the work conditions they have there. How is the day of a worker,
okay,
or a worker maybe in Southeast Asia, for example?
Oh, I don't know about Southeast Asia. I can tell you about Central and Eastern Europe, if that's okay.
I know the comparison, you know?
Okay, so my research was comparative of mainland China and Central and Eastern Europe. So I think the big difference is in terms of overtime, I would say. So that works really differently. And I think when it comes to China, when it comes also to Southeast Asia, it is the kind of disciplinary regime is much stronger, and its imposed stronger than in Central and Eastern Europe. So these are differences. To expand a bit more on Central and Eastern Europe in particular, and I think then the differences will also become more clear. I think where in East Asia and in mainland China, you have more of the continuity of production. What you have that is typical of working conditions in Central and Eastern Europe is that you would have higher and lower production peaks. And this then goes back to the system that I was describing. And therefore, you have different working conditions between agency workers and the core workers, which I think is really important for us. And the agency workers are the ones who would kind of bear the burden of highs and lows in production. So they could be working shifts between 12 and 14 hours when there is work, right? But they could also be waiting for days without doing anything if there is no work, if there is no orders. And I think this is important for us because they don't get paid, right? And we don't have this situation, for example, in mainland China. What is also other aspect that is really interesting for us is that they, how do I say this? They are under a form of, because they're agency workers, they experience double form of control. And that double form of control is they are controlled both by the agency and by the firm, especially if you think about what happens on the assembly line. So we have intensification of control, but they are also controlled by the agencies in their off work time because they are placed in the dormitories, okay? And this is then very similar now to workers in Southeast Asia and what we know about China, how dormitories extend the control into the private sphere and extend the work time. And I just want to show a quick quote from you, which is here. So this is an agency worker who has just finished working their shift. Okay, so they have done their 12 hours and they're gone to bed. But the coordinator from the agency kind of comes into their room and says, well, we need you for the next shift. And therefore kind of grabs them, takes them out of the bed and brings them back to the factory. So we see that they experience this double form of control that is really important. And extends, kind of intensifies both the control and extends the working day. But also when it comes to agency workers, and this is what I want to stress because this is quite different from the core workers, they are also under a number of penalties. So for example, if they are ill, they have to cover their hospital costs and they will be fired. And I think this is very similar also to what we know from other parts of the world. So they don't get the bonus that are promised for the regular attendance, but they're pushed to do overtime. This is similar too. And then if they leave before the contractual 90 days, they have usually 3 months contracts, okay? Then they lose all the bonuses and they have to pay the fine. So, you know, we see that this happens a number of deduction from the pay through the penalties and the fines. But if we think that none of this happens to the core workers, then we are wrong, because there is a system also for core workers that is also there to guarantee flexibility and I think and save money. And this is what is called our bank system. So these workers need to work. So the directly hired workers, they need to work for 930 hours over 6 months. Okay, and this was agreed through a collective agreement. So what this means is that the workers, yes, get the regular salary, which is important in the moments of low and high production, so the days when there is actually very little going on, but any supplement they will get from the weekend, it gets lost because it's all paid at the flat rate, so because you got to get to your 930 hours, right? So also, there is, sorry, also, if workers don't work enough days, they basically owe hours to the company, and they become indebted to the company and have to work till they repay those hours. So, and if they get overtime, this will be repaid only at the end of the 6 months, and this is why workers stay as well. So I think if I was to summarize this quickly, and I have a slide to help us with this, when it comes to agency workers, we see a workforce that is kind of tied into a contract. It is under a threat of penalty. It is subject to illicit deductions from pay. It's vulnerable to deportation if they are not EU nationals. If they lose job, they lose accommodation, and therefore they risk homelessness. And the accommodation is usually quite isolated. So this is a kind of moment of social segregation, and they're often distant from any meaningful legal protection.
You have been talking us about borders, about migrant workers. Do you have any idea of how COVID has affected these kind of people, these migrant workers?
I don't know much. We don't have much information, unfortunately. I wish we would have more. You know much as I do that at the beginning of the COVID, that migrant workers, EU migrant workers, were kind of, they said they were the only frequent flyers left, right? Because they were flying in between countries for different needs in different sectors. But we do have a bit of information that was shared, and it is published, and this is a website, and this is from the very beginning of the pandemic. And what workers were mostly angry about was, of course, the lack of protection gear that was at the beginning missing. But it was also that if they were ill, they were told to stay at home, and they would be paid only 60% of the pay. This is core workers. And also that managers retreated to the safety of their homes, and they were pushing the production from their homes while the workers were on the assembly lines. And I think the quote says this really clearly.
Si algú té una pregunta, seria al moment. Si no, em faig jo una, que en tinc moltes. I would like to know, you have been working with migrant pregnant women?
Oh, yes. Thank you for that question. Absolutely. So I have this slide I want to show, and this is, so working with migrant workers, there is always one category that gets left out. And this is mostly also the trade unions, they forget about migrant women, but pregnant migrant women, no one kind of thinks about them. So we have worked with an NGO, and we have developed a website, and we have distributed leaflets locally. They have led to more awareness about rights of pregnant migrant women. The website is in Mongolian, in Czech, in English, in Russian, and Ukrainian. And it provided information about resident permits, about health services and health insurance, possibility of leave from work during pregnancy and maternity, and possibilities to have social benefits and the rights in the workplace. Thank you.
Maybe one of the main problems all these kind of workers have is, and I would like to talk about this, is the legal problems they have, and how to, they don't have like this kind of, you know, when you are in your country, sometimes you know who can help you, but when you're a migrant worker, you are alone. You don't have this kind of network that maybe can help you. Do you know what happened? What happens in this case? Where do they find or look at least for some help?
So there are always local NGOs that have been really amazing, that my team has been working with, that provide from legal information to information about language courses, to help with moms with kids. But I think we also have to always keep in mind that migrant workers have loads of knowledge. They have their own networks, and especially in the dormitories, they share that information, right? So whether they come from Vietnam or whether they come from Serbia, they will have had, this is just one of the jobs they are doing. So they would have worked elsewhere before. And after this one, they might be going elsewhere. So they exchange this information about themselves. They will know, they will be able to tell you exactly how much money they earn in Greece, collecting peppers, how much money they are earning doing electronics or anything else. And the problem that the factories and companies face is that the workers leave, okay? So a lot of strategies that the factories put in place is about how do they prevent, how do they control workers so that they wouldn't leave? So let's just not forget the richness of experience and networks and collective and individual agency that all of these workers have.
Sometimes I think that when we think about this industry, we think about an industry that we cannot change. And it works like this because it's capitalism and we can do anything against it, or at least to try to do it better. What can we do as a consumers of this kind of products? Because we cannot, sometimes we cannot say no to them. What can we do? We don't like what you have been explaining, not your explanations, but the world that is behind it. But what can we do?
I think we can participate at events like this, right? We can inform ourselves, which I think is really important. And I think information is crucial because one of the things I have been researching one specific electronics company, contract manufacturing in Eastern Europe for now 8 years. And I think when we started doing that work, there was no information out there at all about working conditions, about who the workers are, forms of vulnerabilities, exploitation. So it's really about gathering information. It is about circulating information, and it is then about forming networks so that we can influence kind of at different points. Like the supply chain is complex, right? I think our interventions need to be complex too, and we need to find specific pressure points where to intervene at different times. And I think that starts from making things visible to then working with migrant rights groups, and also to work with organizations such as Electronics Watch, who have done amazing job, especially in Czech Republic, in terms of improving the working conditions for workers in the electronic sector.
Okay, to finish this interview, I would like to read you a comment we have received in the chat that people are writing us. It's from Lennon, who works with migrant people in Taiwan. He says that it might be worse in Taiwan, especially when it's done by migrant workers from Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam, or Thailand. Workers in the factories are mostly regulated to stay in the dorms, managed by agencies. Lack of overtime premium is common, but the calculation is often confusing, so it's not easy for migrants to complain. Many of them can't even hold their passports, for their employers often hold it. We have told about this. During the local, this is interesting, maybe you can comment this, Theo. He says, during the local outbreak in some factories in Taiwan in 2021, most migrant workers in all industries were forbidden to go out for months. Many of them live in the rooms for between 8 and 20 workers in one room, and the congested living condition is the main reason for the local outbreak in the factories. Do we have any risk of this here? You have been told, you told us about this situation. What can you say about this?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. So some of this is very similar, and some of it is slightly different. So the dormitories are used in a very similar way that Lennon is suggesting. What is really, I think, interesting for us is that when it comes to agency workers, with the situations of holding passports are extremely rare. This doesn't happen, and I think this has to be seen in the logic of that these workers are on 3 months contracts, and the fact that the whole logic of it is to have these workers mobile so that they come and go, and to fit the workers to the needs of the production. So you have a just-in-time production, so you have just-in-time workers. So I think that slightly the logic between the two parts of the world is different. What is really important, I think, for us to think is then in Central and Eastern Europe, when the workers get recruited, they often get recruited by agency in one country, and then they get signed on a contract in an agency in another country, and they then work for a factory in a third country, and they are paid by another agency. So I think there is a lack of transparency in terms of who is responsible and how to claim your rights, which I think is really important for us to keep in mind and to compare how agencies operate globally and what are the similarities and what are the differences. When it comes to COVID, I'm familiar with what Lennon is describing in Taiwan. I don't have this kind of information in the electronic sector in Central and Eastern Europe, but we did have similar information from the meat packing industry. You will remember what was happening in Germany during the COVID. That was quite similar for the Central and Eastern European workers in meat packing dormitories, factories, and the dormitories in Germany that we have read in the newspapers.
Hi ha alguna altra pregunta? No?
Any other questions? No?
Being with us here in the Mobile Social Congress, and thank you. It has been really interesting.
Thank you so much for having me.
Aplaudiments, sisplau. Thank you. Bé, cedeixo, anem bastant bé de temps.
Okay, then. So now I will give the floor to we will start talking about green transition myths, and we'll talk about it with Quique Gornés from the City Council of Barcelona. A huge round of applause for him. Well, as my colleague already said, today we are going to be talking about green transition myths, and we will do that with 3 speeches, one by Alfons Pérez, who's a researcher and activist in the field of globalization. He has been working for many years about the impacts of the energy model promoted by the European Union and the influence of capitalism, especially financial capitalism. And he is also working basically in the transformation that the capitalism creates in this green capitalism that is now being widespread as a manifestation of how scarce resources are. Our next speaker will be Marina Paulik, who is also an activist from Serbia. She's the CEO of the NGO Kremi Promeni, and she will be talking about all the things that have been done in Serbia to face the establishment of a lithium mine, and how community leaders and how they have been working to try and avoid environmental impact. And our third speech will be speaker from the Polytechnical University of Manresa, Tony Dorado, who's a chemical engineer, and he coordinates a project called Biometallum, also called Menja Mòbils in Catalan, which is a project that deals with technological transfer that tries to promote the recovery of metals that can be found in cell phones, mobile phones, and other e-waste. We are going to start with Alfons Pérez, and I'm going to be sitting on the table as well. Excellent. Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? I really hope so. First of all, I would like to thank the interest about our research, which is still not published, but I'm grateful for this, and also for inviting me to this event, which is such a well-known and necessary event. Today, I will be discussing the research with it about critical minerals that are important for electronics. This is a research that we did at ICTA with the Autonomous University of Barcelona, but also with Medicos Mundo Mediterránea and with the Observatory of Globalization. Can I have a way of showing my slides? Thanks. Let me see my pointer. Okay. So, the myths of green transformation. To begin, the title of this panel is The Myths of Green Transition. It is important to consider the background, the history. Of course, we have a lot of information in this slide, but what I'm trying to show is that this transition that we are living in our economic model, which started with industrial capitalism, then financial capitalism, and now we are in the middle of something that is called green capitalism. One has not replaced the other, but they overlap. We have industrial capitalism, financial capitalism, we also have green capitalism, and the thesis, the main ideas of green capitalism are also very present. So when we talk about these green myths, we have to talk about also the messages. And when we talk about greenwashing, well, everything can be green now. An airport can be green, Olympic Games can be green, everything can be sustainable. I remember I went to Mallorca and I found a green rally of electric cars. So everything is green now. So there's no problem now of calling anything green, eco, bio, whatever it is. So I believe that what we have to do is to understand this thesis, these ideas that are very, very present in our lives, especially in this idea of the transition. And a turning point has been the pandemic, when we have started thinking about economic recovery. We also called it green digital recovery, unlike other historical references that were not green, but right now everything is green. I could talk about it for ages, but I just would like to share with you a link, because there is a book that explains everything, these new green deals, these new generation funds for economic recovery, and how they foster this idea of a green capitalism with some ideas that are important, but the technological solution and markets are still there. And I believe that the research we did has been conditioned by our context, where green capitalism is here. I will now show you research. Of course, it's a very long research, and I will try to summarize this research in just some slides. And there are four main conclusions. The first one is that critical minerals of electronic vehicles are singular. There's a singularity about it. So it is substantially different from conventional vehicles. So we have to pay attention to that. But there is also a transition towards the electric vehicle, which is done in a context of growth of the automobile business. And if you're familiar with energy transition or environmental transition in general, you will see that we're implementing some actions to reduce consumption of energy. But to reduce this in the automobile business, it differs. So we have to think about this singularity of critical minerals in this moment where there's a growth. And then the projection of all these policies globally has some limits, because there are biophysical limits. We know now that there are some utopian thoughts when it comes to minerals, because we may not have enough minerals, especially those that are critical. And finally, with all this huge demand of materials, we are, of course, having negative impacts on environmental conflicts. So having said all that, I would like to share with you a thought, this difference between electric cars and conventional cars, but we should look at everything, technologies and so on. But as an example, here we have the report launched in the year 2020, which said that the electric cars also had copper, lithium, nickel, almost 40 kilograms of nickel. So the most important thing here is to see the difference of conventional vehicles versus electric vehicles. This is on average, but there are several technologies for several vehicles and several sub-technologies that combine different materials. But we should see this big difference versus conventional cars. And the second thing I would like to share with you has to do with the fact that this business, this automobile business, is growing non-stop. If we compare the figures from 25 to the figures of 2015, we see a huge growth. And if we project this to the future, we realize that in 2050, when the public policies of Europe are trying to find this neutrality when it comes to the environment, or these European Green Deals, trying to reach this target in 2050, if we consider that, if we do this projection, by 2050, we will have 4,580 million vehicles. It's obvious that we cannot replace our vehicles immediately. But what I am trying to show here is the huge amount of demand. We're talking about a lot of cars from a business that keeps on growing and that is also renewing the fleet. So depending on the stimuli, maybe every 8, 12 years, we will have to renew our cars. So it's a huge figure. And beyond the detail of whether it will be all these amounts of copper or lithium, the most important thing for us is to understand this huge magnitude of the demand. For some minerals, this is something that we have never seen in the history of humanity. I would also like to share with you another graph. It's full of information, but on the right-hand side, you can see that the International Energy Agency has shown that in 2 decades, from 2020 to 2040, we will increase by 42 the extraction of lithium, 25 graphite, 21 cobalt, 19 nickel, and 7 rare earths. So this graph shows again how big the demand is. And this, of course, represents a huge impact for some territories. And this is already happening. As I was saying, there are some reports, a myriad of scientific reports, like the University of Sydney report, or reports from the Zaragoza University or Valladolid University, saying that if we project our data with our ambitions of a green transition with the ideas of this green capitalism, we will not have enough minerals. The University of Sydney was showing nickel, lithium, and cobalt, which are 3 minerals that are very, very important, especially for batteries of e-cars. And then there are other studies about different materials that could reach the critical point until before the end of the century, but maybe the end of the century is too far away. 2050 is almost here. And I have to be honest, in the field of geology, there is a huge discussion. And for us, the idea is not whether we reach the biophysical limit, but what will happen in this transition, because for each tone, for each extraction, there is an impact. So this is a summary page with many more components, again, to explain. If you're familiar with the impact of mining, well, then it will seem ordinary, but there's a huge environmental pressure that entails a lot of energy. We require a lot of energy, and it's not renewable, it's fossil energy. So we want to have a green transition, but we need a lot of energy for the extraction of minerals. So I also wanted to show different impacts, like rare earths, for example. It's all mixed up, but there are even radioactive products. So this is a summary page in our report that also explains the extraction areas, because we are drawing a map that is absolutely different from the map that we're familiar with. When it comes to fossil fuel, we're talking about different things. We're not talking about Latin America, lithium and cobalt, or in Congo, or nickel in Indonesia, or the Philippines. So here we have a different map. And this is a map that is not replacing fossil fuels, but it needs fossil fuels to do all this extraction. So it's a different layer of complexity for international actions. And finally, I would like to highlight that this is not something that will happen in the future. The impact is affecting us already. We have problems in Congo, we have problems in many places. So extracting lithium at huge amounts in Bolivia is also leading to demonstration. This is a very good message. Like, we do not eat batteries. Can you see these people in the demonstration with that message? This is an important thing. And then there have also been some demonstrations in Indonesia for nickel extraction, and we can find many environmental conflicts related to this green transition. And this is it. This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alphonse. I would like to ask you a question, a couple of questions, actually. You mentioned new maps. And considering the current situation, we are seeing all this news in the media about Europe, but also international geopolitics. So these new maps for new materials that will overlap the map of fossil fuels, how will they affect geopolitically or with our international geopolitics? So can we find a new law for copper, nickel? Can we find something like that? Well, this is a very good question. So there is a key stakeholder here, which is China. China, according to some theories, is 1 or 2 decades ahead of us. They have more extraction capabilities, but also they have been capturing different stages in the global chain of supply. So China has a capacity of extraction in Latin America and Africa, but also they exert control over the processing of these raw materials that are necessary. And this, of course, gives them huge power. And on top of that, they can create the technology that is needed. So at the end of the day, China becomes like the key place where extraction is maybe done elsewhere, but they keep the control of it. So it's the main thing. And China, through their plans, they have projected this deployment in the world because they have these planned capitalist policies and also the productive capacity. And by doing joint ventures with companies at the end of the 90s, at the beginning of the 20th century, at the end of the day, what they did was to offer cheap labor, outsource some production, but also have the technology. They now know how to do the technology, and this, of course, changes things. And then there's also a matter of how we can redistribute markets with raw materials, and also in terms of these projections to extract materials, we need energy for that, because energy is limited. In Europe, we're now living an energy crisis, of course, worsened by the Russian conflict in Ukraine, but it has some biophysical basis. So when it comes to gas, for example, so everything is intertwined. Thank you so much. So after this general framework that Alphonse helped us to create, we will now focus on the first step in this chain. And I will give the floor to Marina Pavlik, who will be sharing a speech with us virtually. I hope she's ready and I hope she can participate. Can you hear us, Marina? Great. Marina Pavlik, as I said before, She works at Gremi Promeni NGO, she directs it, and she has led a campaign of mobilizations to stop lithium mining in Serbia. So the floor is all yours.
Good evening. Good to be here. So maybe I should start. I hope you can hear me well. So I will tell you a few words about how and what we did in the past couple of months while we were fighting against Rio Tinto multinational campaign, who were planning that to make several minings, lithium minings in Serbia. So our battle started almost 2 years ago when I heard for Rio Tinto for the first time. Back then, I was not aware of the situation and what harm can that bring to Serbia and people in my country. But during the time, we realized and learned a lot. So the massive protest against Rio Tinto started in November last year. And the spark for that was the advertisement that Kreni Promeni made at that point. So in order for you to understand what happened there, I will give you a context. So back then in November, we had around 300,000 people who signed a petition against Rio Tinto on the platform that we are having as Kreni Promeni. So people were pretty much aware of the situation and pretty much against. At the same time, our government was for Rio Tinto, presenting it as something that can bring a lot of prosperity to our country and everything that was going in favor to them. So at the same time, our government has 80% of the parliament, 80% of the national media, so they are covering basically everything. And during that time in November, Rio Tinto was playing advertisement on national TV about how it can bring a lot of good things to Serbia. So what we wanted to do as Kreni Promeni is to make advertisement that can say a different part of the story and how it can destroy nature. And because we didn't have enough money to pay for those advertisements who are really expensive, we organize citizens because we are the organization that are organizing citizens and believe in citizen power in order to make some changes. We organize them in order to make 30 seconds advertisement that will say another different part of the story. And what happened back then in November, we were rejected by national TV, and because we were rejected, we played that advertisement in front of the building of the national TV station. So what happened back then is that in 24 hours, 1 million people saw that advertisement. And that was a huge mobilizing moment when we started to talk around that topic even more. During the same time, our government said that during the next week after that, they will adopt 2 laws that are going into favor to Rio Tinto as well: expropriation law and law for citizen initiative and referendum. So what happened in Serbia is that many organizations started to react. And every day we had protests, day by day, because the government announced that they will adopt those 2 laws next week. On one of those protests, we said, okay, we are protesting every day. We have 300,000 people who are rejecting this, but they will adopt it anyway. So we were in the position that we need to go and be more radical in some way. So we said, if they adopt those 2 laws, we will go and block the roads in Serbia, which is of course illegal in our country, but we felt like we don't have nothing else to do because our voices are not heard. So no matter that happened, they simply adopted the first law. And we were on the streets on first Saturday after that, blocking the main roads in Serbia. So I will now share the slide. I have only one with just several pictures so you can imagine what was happening back then. Just give me a few seconds, please. Okay. So what is happening on the first picture on the left, top left, you can see that we organized a lot of creative tactics against, this was in front of office of Rio Tinto, where we said red cards to them and we said like, you can go from Serbia, we really don't want you, and the whole, everything that Rio Tinto is bringing to our country. On the second one, you can see the first day of blockades. So because this was illegal, we were threatened that we will be arrested as Kreni Promeni, who was organizing in some way all the people who were going to go out on the streets. And on the second picture, you can see 10 of us in the middle of 40 policemen who were not giving us option to go out on the road. So during that time, when we said that we're going to block the roads, our tactic was give us information what roads you will block. It will not have leaders. Just give us the place and time. We had all the same time, 1 hour. We said we're gonna block for 1 hour, and we said that people should come on that place from many different angles because we knew that if we are going all together, we're gonna be stopped. So that's why on this picture you can see team of Kreni Promeni, only 10 of us, coming from only one way. So while I was standing in the middle of that, I was really thinking that everything was done, that we're going to be arrested and this is it. But at the same time, I was getting a lot of messages of the people who were on the picture number 3. So many people, because we don't have that many policemen, so many people did it, and many people went out on the streets, and that gave a lot of courage, a lot of power to the people that we can actually do something about it. So that was the first Saturday. We were done after 1 hour, but we said if they adopt the second law and they don't withdraw the first one, we're gonna keep blocking every Saturday, every day, every time 1 more hour than the previous one. So the picture number 4, you can see that was on only one, and blocking the roads was happening in more than 20, 40, 50 towns across the Serbia at the same time. So on the picture number 4, you can see the same spot after 1 week. Only on this road, it was 30 to 40,000 people, but many different places across Belgrade only, there was the same amount of people. And across the whole country, there was on many squares, people who were going out. At the same time, people were getting fees. There was not, on every place, there was not policemen, but they were getting fees all the time that we need to, fines that we need to pay because we are doing something illegal. And as you can see on the picture number 5, we were like really giving the permission like to ambulance to go through. So our message was like, we are not against anyone, we just don't want those laws to be adopted. So what happened after that? Basically, president called and he said that he announced in public that he will withdraw both 2 laws, and he said no to Rio Tinto because his people doesn't want it. Of course, we felt that that can be something that is not true, that he's just saying that, but basically what happened is that he done that, like he withdrawn 2 laws. And at some point we said, okay, this is it, like we withdrawn those 2. But at the same point, many different organizations said, okay, but this is not it. Rio Tinto is not out of the country. We should keep pushing and pushing and pushing. So at that moment, there was a mess. As you can see on picture number 4, there was a unity. No matter you are for vaccines or without, you are religious or not, like we said, we had the narrative of unity, and we said like, this is the topic of all of us. But after that, when we did the first win, everybody had different demands. Everybody was saying, this is important and this is important. And there was a huge mess in the media. So what happened back then, that some people keep blockading the roads, some were doing some other stuff. So we as Kreni Promeni, we decided to go to the legal way. And we said we're going to organize citizen initiative in order to keep fighting against lithium mining. So we thought if we collect 30,000 signatures in 1 week, before elections that are coming, the assembly will not have the right to say, no to that, and that we can win in that way. But what happened basically after that is that we were attacked in front of the same National Assembly in Belgrade, in capital. And that was the first time when we were having the media conference, and for the first time police didn't show up. And for the first time there were men and women who were really arguing a lot, and they were not giving us permission neither to say something aloud. So when we saw that, we said we cannot go into citizens' initiative, because that means that our people are not safe. That can happen. If that happened to us in capital, that can happen in every village where we are having volunteers who will collect signatures. So we basically stopped and said, okay, we are asking this country to give us the how to say this in English, to really promise that we will be safe during this travel, and that they will adopt the spatial plan, like, because we had the spatial plan for Rio Tinto, that they will withdraw that plan. So basically, after that, we had camping, we had many different tactics, and a spatial plan was withdrawn as well. So that means that Rio Tinto is out of country formally, because they cannot work at this point and do the things they wanted to do. But we still feel like there is a threat, because they can just bring another company that can do the same thing. And that's why we are still pushing. Next week we are starting a citizen initiative again, and we hope that before elections we will collect those signatures and we will really stop lithium mining in Serbia. So thank you for listening.
Gracias, Marina.
Thanks so much, Marina. Well, this is a truly effervescent and very inspiring initiative to get so many out on the streets to mobilize. Which would you say, Marina, made the mobilization cross-cutting? How did you manage to build a small group of 10 people surrounded by police to reach 300 people or 30,000 out on the street?
But I can assume something, so can you say it in English, please?
Vale.
Marina, can you hear the interpretation?
You think your mobilizations make greater? How can you pass from 10 people around and with police around you to 3,000 people paralyzing a country? What's the factor that make it transversal?
Yeah, there are many different. So in order to understand that, you need to understand my background. So for more than 10 years, I'm doing community organizing work in Serbia. And while doing that, I was using the methodology of Professor Marshall Gantz from Harvard Kennedy School. So community organizing approach is really specific, because by doing that, you really think how to make a good strategy, how to make a good structure of people, how you can do a people power. But during that time of 10 years, I realized that something is missing. While I was fighting for different causes, I realized that people are missing, like the masses are missing. So that's why, as Kreni Promeni, because we are a young organization, we exist for only 2 years now, we decided to combine community organizing and digital mobilizing approach. That's why we had numbers, because we, during this time of 2 years, we were growing during the time. As you can see, like we had only for this petition, we had 300,000 people with who we could react. We could send them email, we could send them information about what is happening. We could send them information about when to go out. During the same time, because this was a huge thing in the public, our social networks were growing. For example, in November, we had 16,000 people on Instagram. Now we have more than 88,000 people. So like the numbers were really going high, because and there are many different factors why is that happening. So one part of it is that we use what we had at that specific moment. There was an urgency. We had 2 laws that should be adopted in a really short run. We had elections that are coming, and we all know that during the pre-election period, you can fight for some demands that usually you cannot be heard after the election. So that was definitely one of the things. But also it was the way how we led the whole process. Like we were always, whatever we did as a tactic before, we were announcing what is the next step. And every step was bringing us step and step further to the goal that we wanted to achieve. And I just wanted to say that this is not all the, not only Kreni Promeni was the lead for the whole process, because many different organizations approached, many people felt that this is the topic that is needed to have. And many people felt like this is somehow combined also with the not be heard in Serbia, because as I said, like we have the ruling party that is having majority, and like many felt like this is the way for them to speak out.
Gracias.
Thank you very much, Marina. Just tell you that there's translation in the Zoom. In the Zoom, you can choose. You will have translation to English. Just because we told Kike to ask the questions in Catalan, so for the next questions, if you can please use the translation in the Zoom, that would be great. Thank you very much.
So can you hear the English interpretation, Marina? So we gave you the general framework, and we've talked about the origin of the materials, and now we'll be looking at the end use of the technology products and this green capitalism and the new technology elements in our everyday life. And for this, Tony will be sharing his project with us. Hello, good afternoon. First, I wanted to thank the organizers for inviting us. It's an honor to be part of this panel and share this project, which we are so excited about. This project we originally called Biometallum, and it's popularly known as the Menja Mobile project. It's not the name we gave the project initially, but it's a name that everyone knows for this project, Menja Mobile. But in essence, the project is the same. I am a researcher from the Polytechnic University of Catalonia in Manresa. I guess everyone knows where Manresa is. It's a small town in the center of Catalonia. And through our research, when we've been doing research for 10 years, and the goal basically, and this is our mission statement, during these years, we've developed a biotechnological process, and at the heart of this biotechnology, we have microorganisms to be applied to electronic waste management or similar companies that generate similar waste. This is a technology to minimize the environmental impact and the social issues that are linked to electronic waste. And we also want to bring electronics managers on board. These are companies that look for profit. So what we tell them is that we can recover these metals, giving them a greater profit than the one they are getting at present for managing their waste. And we do it a different way than the conventional processes. They use ovens that work with a very high temperature. They have a huge energy expenditure, and they have to centralize large volumes so that the technology to recover technology waste can be done. So this, at the end of the day, means that electronic waste managers in our countries act as middlemen. They bring together the waste and then they send them to Central Europe, where they use these technologies to recover a very small proportion of these metals. The project started off because we became aware of the problem posed by electronic waste from mobile phones and any electronic device, computers or small or large houseware appliances. And from all of the waste in the world, if we compare it to other types of waste, electronic waste is the fastest growing, about 3 to 5% every year. So we're talking of 40 to 60 million tons of this waste every year, and it's growing every day. Our society is becoming more and more technological, and our consumption habits mean that this waste is growing exponentially. And while this waste is growing, the amount of waste that we can recycle is very small. If we look at this story, only the green part is what is being recycled. So it's a very small amount. And what happens with all of these electronic devices that aren't recycled? Well, they end up in other countries. The problem originates in one country, but it has an impact in other countries. Consumption of electronics is obviously stronger in capitalist economies like the EU and the US. That is where greatest electronic waste is generated. But these electronic waste end up having an impact or transported to other countries. Usually they're developing countries, and very often these flows are hidden as donations. We could say they're donating computers or smartphones to these countries, but when they reach their final destination, these computers are not usable. It's just an excuse to get rid of a problem that is a huge amount of electronic waste that we aren't even able to process here. And obviously this has a huge impact environmentally and also on the health of people living in these countries. We mustn't forget that in these electronic devices, there are many components that are highly toxic and that have an impact on people's health. We carried out a study, and it's curious because culturally here in Catalonia, we are leading the rankings on mobile phones. It's curious because we see that we are the same level of countries that are highly technological, and we buy a new phone very often. It is estimated that a mobile phone could have a life of 5 years, but on average, we change our mobile phones every 18 months. So this means that the amount of waste we're generating is very high. And we don't get a new phone because the old one stops working, just because a new model is on the market and we want to have the latest model which has a better camera on it, let's say. And then we also have a culture of only 5% of people will use second-hand mobile phones. And the consequence of all of this is a huge growth in the amount of electronic waste. Electronic devices have evolved very rapidly. If we look at these electronic waste and we look at the features and characteristics, they change rapidly because even a single brand, the composition of a device can change very quickly. And it's a big challenge to recycle devices that are so different. Nevertheless, if we look at a smartphone, for instance, what we can see is that roughly 30% of it is made up of plastic, 30% is the screen, and then 40% of the smartphone is made up of metals. And these are metals that are used for electronic devices. And if we want to use these devices and more of them are produced, it will mean that we have to find more and more raw materials for this. So where can we go and look for these metals to create new electronic devices? Well, in mines, where we extract more and more minerals to produce smartphones.
A clear example is this mineral that you can see, chalcopyrite, which is the mineral that is used for copper. Copper is one of the most interesting materials because it has very interesting conditions and properties. and the demand has been multiplied. It's doubled, a double-fold demand. So this shows how much copper we end up consuming. All the reserves that we were mentioning before, of course, entail some geographic limits. In this case, in the case of copper, we cannot find copper everywhere. If you look at this, for example, in Europe, there's not a lot of copper, but 1/3 of the amount of copper reserves in the world is in Chile. And that's what happens. So we are talking about this metal, but if we talk about all the metals that are necessary for a cell phone, for a mobile phone, that means that there is a huge dependency on the political situation of the country and everything which is associated with the specific location of the supply. Again, these areas which are rich in natural resources tend to be the places where there is a difficult situation. Oftentimes, they do not have the technology for the process of extracting the minerals in a safe way. And oftentimes, obviously, this is also associated with conflict, social conflict that we were mentioning before. And this is what tends to happen because there is this direct relationship. And the final problem that we have identified is this. The materials are scarce, so we are extracting more and more the minerals, and the concentration of real metal is decreasing. And what does that mean? It means that we need more and more advanced technologies for the extraction process. And at the same time, we need to extract a huge amount and we create a lot of waste. So it is not only a problem of energy, but the concentration is being reduced. So we have to extract even more quantities and we only may use a small amount. So if you look at the percentage of copper that we can find is 0.4% only. So we need all this amount of copper, but what is the real amount of mineral that we can extract? And what are the consequences of all this management of waste? Having said that, if we compare the metals that can be found in a cell phone, and we look at the concentration, this 0.4% of copper, and we compare that to an electronic device, there can be a 10, 20% copper in an electronic device. So it seems logical and interesting to make a lot of efforts in recovering this copper that already exists in devices. These devices will not be reused. And after the cycle, after these devices will not be used anymore, we should invest our efforts in developing technologies that allow us to recover metals from mobile phones instead of continuing extracting minerals that we have, even a smaller proportion. So the challenge is absolutely important. This waste is super complex. It is so complex. This would be the circuits inside of a mobile phone. And this challenge is so complex that if we took the periodic table, we could find almost 40 different chemicals in a phone. That means that there is such a huge complex mix inside the phones that recycling waste becomes a complexity. We really need to separate in 40 different flows each of the metals. Obviously, some have a bigger proportion than others, but still, this is the case, and it becomes a huge challenge. Another important point is where can we start these projects? All these projects start, with recycling. Recycling, unfortunately, is small. We are losing flow of materials as users of technology. What is absolutely important and paramount is to have a proper collection system so that we can really get this waste. We all know that when we buy an electrical appliance and we have to get rid of the old one, the law forces the electrical appliance manufacturers to collect our old electrical appliance. But we cannot forget something, and that has changed. It has changed with the pandemic, which is business. I mean, we are all buying online, and then with electrical appliances, some things are changing as well, because if you buy an electrical appliance in a physical store, they are forced to do this collection themselves. But if it's an e-store, it should be the same. So let us look at the selective collection or in Catalonia. These are data from the Agency of Waste Collection in Catalonia. We can see the impact of electrical devices collected in Barcelona, in the area of Barcelona. As you can see, it's an important quantity. But if we analyze this over time and we analyze the last 10 years, we will see the increase in waste of electronic devices and electrical appliances. There are two reasons for that. The consumption is increasing and we are getting more and more waste, but there's another positive thing. We are becoming more effective, more efficient when it comes to collecting waste. And that means that, I mean, worldwide, it's a growth of 5%, but here in Catalonia, our growth is 22% when it comes to selective collection of waste. So what about the management of all this? Waste managers in our country, Catalonia, what they do is first a mechanical treatment. They reduce the volume of the device. They try and classify plastic material and so on and so forth. But what we do is we try to avoid this being centralized and sent away. But what we want is to have this waste sent to our plants. We were talking before about the economic cost of extracting material and the energy cost of extracting material, but there's a huge energy demand also for the collection and recovery of metals. Look at this, it seems like a chemical plant, but it's a recycling plant. This is what we really are doing. And the main characteristic of these plants is that they need huge volumes. So they end up being companies, huge companies that have a monopoly of the management of waste. They work with chemicals that are very, very aggressive. So they have a huge environmental impact, and they work at very high temperatures, thousands and thousands of degrees. So this is a very important thing to consider. We talk about our project. Our project, Biometallum, is trying to make the most of some microorganisms that we can find in nature. They are not genetically modified. They can be found in nature under certain circumstances. And what we do is we make them help us to really create like an extracting agent. Our microorganisms create a liquid, and we use this liquid because it has the capacity, when in contact with the electronic waste, to separate metals in an interesting way. So the best thing about this process, let me show it to you. This would be the scheme of our process. But the most important thing is that there are microorganisms that are constantly being regenerated with no need for high temperatures. They work at a regular room temperature, and that entails a huge energy saving because we can work at 25 degrees, 30 degrees, rather than thousands of degrees. So this liquid that I was mentioning is in touch with the e-waste, and finally we recover metals. So there's a biological regeneration, biomass separation, e-waste, bioleaching, and metal recovery, and it's so pure at the end that we can reuse it for new devices or for other applications. This would be a photo of the microorganisms. They are harmless. They are organisms that can be found in nature. So no problems with them. And finally, this is the final product we obtain. These sort of layers, in this case, it's copper layers. This is one of the metals that is important for us. So this copper is quite pure, almost 49%, so it can be used. And as you can see, it's a cycle. So when this agent is in touch with the waste, we can recover it, and microorganisms can activate again to create the optimal conditions for them to work again. What does this mean? That this high consumption of reactives and external agents that conventional energy is needed, we are minimizing those, and it becomes almost non-existent because this is a cycle. This process has been patented, so we have a patent for that. Our main aim is to prove that this process is an innovation that has not been used before, and we of course would like to avoid some people having economic profit from that. Our objective is that this technology, I mean, this is a very open project. We want everybody who's interested in to collaborate with us, and I will tell you more about this collaboration. But as for the technological development, it's a very long story, but to summarize it, we started small. We started with a small volume, but then we developed this more and more until we got a pilot plant, so to speak, a pilot facility with this technology. And right now, we have an almost semi-industrial, almost industrial premises where we have automation to analyze different type of waste and to see how this technology can be applied under different circumstances. This is the core of our technology, these microorganisms. We need to think that it is not it's the same thing that can be found in a water depuration plant. There are also some microorganisms that are used before, they clean the water before getting it back to the river. So it's the same technology that we're using, but we are applying it to the recovery of metals. We are constantly analyzing the respiratory capacity of our project to see what are the best conditions and try to optimize our project to reach our final goal. When we started our project, we conducted an experiment under different circumstances. We were trying to recover 100% of copper in the waste, and we did it within 25 days. In 25 days, I mean, of course, normally chemical reactions are faster, but through our innovation, these 25 days were reduced to 48 hours. 48 hours, and then later on, we have been reducing this time, and now we're able to recover 99%, so almost all copper within 6 to 7 years. So we went from 25 days to 6 hours. So as for the results, we're talking about lithium and cobalt, which are also very interesting for batteries. They are critical. So those are the main elements to build batteries, not only for mobile devices, but for electric cars. So here you have some information about these metals as well. It definitely works when recovering both cobalt and lithium. So, and this final slide is just to share with you that this is an open project. We want it to be applied directly, and we want to do that in an open way. So we have universities, companies, innovation centers, hubs. We collaborate with the public administration and so on and so forth. And finally, as I said, this is an innovation process. We are innovating more and more. The more we grow, the more we need to innovate. And of course, we need these raw materials. In our case, we need mobile phones. So we are explaining always this case because many people have decided that, of course, they will donate their bodies to their corpse to science when they die. But we are now making a call for action. So if you do not want to use a phone, please give it to us. If you don't want to use a device, give it to us, because we definitely would like to keep on working and improve this technology to make it turn into a reality as fast as possible. It's a project based in the circular economics to give a second life to waste instead of exhausting the sources of energy in our nature. So it's this is urban mining, because for us, cities are like a sort of mine, and we need to extract the resources that are already available to us. We do have these resources, and we do have a concentration of resources. The only thing we need is technology. And it is also a project that tries to stimulate the local economy, because stakeholders will be important for us. So local people, they are the ones who have the waste, they are the ones who should recover this waste. Undoubtedly, we also pursue gender equality values. So this may not be very common in the engineering field, but for us, it's 50% researchers who are women in our field. And of course, we are also complying with the Sustainable Development Goals. This is our group. Without it, we would have never achieved any results. So I would like to finish by thanking my team and thanking you all. If you have any questions, I would be delighted to answer them.
Gracias, Toni.
Thank you so much, Tony. I am now very optimistic. I am even overexcited. But I would like to know, what is the current level? I mean, looking at the current level of recovery of materials for e-waste, this is super low. What would be the threshold? To what extent could we reach a level of recovering batteries in such a big amount that we could really see this as an alternative to extracting minerals in the traditional way? And by the way, there is a place in the hall. If you want to leave your old phones there, you can do that. But the other question would be, what would be the obstacles, the challenges? What would be the rest of obstacles in this new recovery of metals that you are suggesting? Thank you. Well, the aim of our project is to prove that, as I was telling you at the beginning, this is a waste that is growing. E-waste is growing. If we have the means to recover these materials, now we are extracting mines under very challenging conditions with a lot of problems and so forth. So if we manage to implement this, we could achieve it. Of course, we have some limitations. We are conducting research now. I'm a chemical engineer, and I work with the environment very, very often to solve environmental challenges. It is not easy to achieve the resources to develop technology when the only objective is to solve an environmental problem. I need to be honest with that. It's very difficult to find resources. In our country, sometimes the priorities lay elsewhere. But what we achieved with this project is a double aim. We are solving an environmental problem, a social problem, but at the same time, we're also proving to people that it can even be interesting economically. It can even be profitable. So this is a win-win situation. And this is when we may succeed. Obviously, we're trying to introduce a technology that is very, very novel in a field where innovation is seldom present. And normally they end up with mechanical projects just in the processes of classifying. However, I think that projects like ours are making an effort to let people know that these type of projects exist and that it is important to pay attention to the environmental impact. Because unless we do a good management of e-waste with our technological consumption, unless we do that, we will not succeed. This is what we're trying to achieve. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. We'd open the floor to questions and answers. I think there's someone from the organizers with a microphone. And I understand that first we are going to take questions and answers from the public who are here in face, and then we have time for people who are online. I see that we have 3 questions in the chat already, and I see that Carla also has a question, so I'll keep an eye open on the chat. Shall we answer the questions from the chat first, or shall I go first? Is Carla? No, you go first, Carla. Okay. So I have two questions, two very quick questions. First, have you started to do any international project? Have you started working on an international project? Have you been able to, if you've been able to identify where electronic waste ends up? I mean, remember 2 years ago, we were talking of Ghana, for instance, where the big electronic waste dumps and terrible working conditions. So first question, do you have any international cooperation projects so that this patent can be made available to other countries that are faced with the same problem? The second question would be, just so that I can understand, can we only recover copper or can we also recover other metals? I was told that copper or aluminum are metals that are quite easy to recover, but others are very difficult to recover. And I'm sure through innovation, we could make it easier to recover other materials, other metals. So I wanted to ask whether you only recover copper or other materials too. And I work in the City Council of Barcelona, but we have links with different organizations who may be interested in this project. Thank you. We'll take 4 questions and answer them. Or do we answer one question at a time? Shall we take the 3 questions from the Zoom chat? And then we answer all 4 of them. Okay, so one of the questions we have in the chat is from Rutvica in English.
Its new electric vehicles production factories is linked to the extraction in Europe. Foxconn's target is of providing components of services for 10% of the world's electric vehicles. Crec que aquesta pregunta pot anar tan adreçada com a la Marina.
I think this question could be answered by Alphonse or Marina, perhaps. Then we have another question in the chat. It's a question for Tony.
Here are movements such as the right to repair. Y la última, també adreçada al Tony, diu, además del cobre, ¿pueden recuperar algún otro metal? Y en qué
A question for Tony is, what other materials beside copper can be recovered and in what perspective? You said there was a question for Alphonse or Marina. Yes, the first question was whether we knew about Foxconn's plan to locate in Europe one of its new electric vehicle production factories is linked to extraction in Europe. The second question, would you like me to repeat that? Too? Yes. The second question, which was also from Rutvica, which I think Tony could answer, is, as this is so vast, how helpful here are movements such as the right to repair? Okay, so we'll first answer the question asked by the lady here in the room. Marina, did you hear the questions addressed to you?
I heard something, but it would be nice if you can repeat it. So what I heard, and maybe you can repeat it one more time if it's convenient, or if not, I can try to answer it, what I understood.
Yeah. Do you know how Foxconn's plans to locate in Europe one of its new electric vehicles production factories is linked to the extraction in Europe? Foxconn's target is of providing components of services for 10% of the world's electric vehicles.
Yes, I don't know much about that, but what I know is that when the whole Serbia government started the process of involving more money into electronic vehicles. We started as Creating Promeni the campaign in putting more money into subsidizing households. Why? Because like we realized that in Serbia, only 6% of pollution is coming from vehicles, and more than 75% is coming from households. So that's why we really started the campaign going in that direction. So I understand that electronic vehicles are really important, and we should put effort into going in that direction. But for Serbia at this point, this is a future that is coming. We have more urgent things to deal with at this point.
Thank you. Passem aquí, Sala. No sé si
Thank you. We'll now answer the question asked in the room. So I don't know the details, but what I can say, because I've studied this, is how there are different European institutions that have started to look at how certain social groups in Europe react to mining activities. They know that the highly sought after raw materials in the global market, and extraction in Europe, until they are economically viable, the primary extraction is viable. I mean, the European Investment Bank in 2019 tried opening up investment in mines in Europe, and there's a lot of money involved. Another thing we've seen in the news, for instance, in Extremadura in Spain with lithium, we must recall that very often it comes down to cost-benefit relationship. And when you see there's a high demand that makes there's insufficient supply, which means the prices remain high for a long time. That's what happened in Latin America, where the prices of commodities stayed very high for 15 years, and it makes it highly profitable to extract mines. And there are also people who, from a more critical approach, says, well, if we want to be responsible for global supply chains until mining is done domestically, we have to be responsible. That's we haven't reached that point yet, but it is something that must be present in our discussions. Well, in the case of the questions that were addressed to me, basically I'd say that we are open to collaboration at all levels. We'd like to collaborate internationally. This project is open to collaboration ideas, and our goal is to get this technology, make it a reality as soon as possible so that everyone can benefit from this technology. So our goal, as I said, is to get as many collaborators and participants on board. And this must also be linked to, I mean, it's useful for us to raise awareness on the problem posed by electronic waste. Not everyone is aware of the issues caused by electronic waste. And with regards to whether we can recover other metals besides copper, we started off with copper because there is a large amount of copper and it's easy to extract. The one that's most easy to recycle is steel. It's very easy to recycle pieces that are made of a single metal. When it comes to taking a large amount of metal like the carcass from a phone, it's easier. But when we talk of mobile phones, where you have all of these circuits, condensers, and electronics that are a combination of rare metals such as coltan, we all know the issues involved. However, if we can replicate this for copper, we for sure can replicate it with other metals. For each process, we need a lot of innovation. For copper, it's quite easy, so we could recover all of the copper with this industrial plant that we have. But now that we are looking at batteries, being able to recover lithium would have a huge potential. Lithium, less than 1% of lithium is being recycled. So all of the lithium that is required to build and construct these new batteries is all having to be extracted and mined. So I think there are hopes in recovering lithium and cobalt with these technologies. So what's important is to look at how we find a way of recovering all of the metals from the batteries. Batteries have a limited life cycle, and after they no longer work, but the metal stays in these batteries. So it's an electrochemical process that makes them work. And it stops working because it stops being active, but the metal is still in the battery. So we need to find ways of recovering these metals and give them a second use instead of having to constantly mine them. And as I said, going back to the initial question, we're more than happy to collaborate and share this project with whoever may be interested. Thank you. Okay, so we're running over time. Thank you all for your participation. Thank you very much, Marina. Thank you to the organizers. And we now move on to the next part of the program. Thanks. So now we'll have a 15-minute break until 7:30 in Europe. And if you stay, you can watch some videos by Setem. Please, those of you who are on Zoom, please don't log off, stay with us, and we will be back at 7:30 to discuss technology as an enemy or as an ally. That will be, as I said, at 7:30. Thank you very much.
Bona tarda a tothom de nou. Seguim en aquesta setena edició del Mobile Social Congress. No m'enrotllaré més.
Good evening, everyone, again. We will now move on to the last of today's session on allies, technology as an ally or an enemy. The moderator is Carlos Bajo, who is a specialist in information and communication technologies for social change in Africa. He's one of the co-founders of Wirico. Welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Okay, so let's dive into the matter because we're slightly delayed. Let's start off this space for exchange. I think it's a very interesting panel because somehow being in one place allows us to see the two sides of the coin, the darkest side of the coin, but also the opportunities, threats and opportunities. I think the fact that it's interesting to come here to explain these two stories with the two profiles we have from the north and the south, which can give us a very complete overview. So we have with us Nora Miralles. May I take off my face mask to speak? Yes? Okay, thank you. So as I was saying, we have Nora Miralles, who is a journalist, a communicator, and she specializes or is an expert in human rights, gender, militarism, and security. She is a member of the feminist cooperative Estudeginsa, and she's a researcher at the Centre d'Estudis per la Pau and the Observatori de Drets Humans i Empresa de la Mediterrània. And in this last organization, she is one of the authors of the report called Mass Surveillance, and she will tell us about the situation today with regards to mass surveillance in France, Spain, and the UK. And then we have Aisha with us. I think she's with us. I don't see. Oh, hi. Hi, Aisha. Hi. So Aisha is connecting from Dakar. She is a journalist and a digital activist. And she is focusing on feminism, human rights defense, and promoting democracy. Aisha is the coordinator of Afriktivist. This is a Pan-African League of digital activists for democracy. And in this space, they are promoting citizen participation, different ways for citizens to participate using digital tools and to strengthen civil society with these digital tools so that they can take ownership and ensure that we can improve democracy. So after those introductions, we can start off by asking Nora to tell us a little bit about the current scenario with regards to mass surveillance in Europe. Basically, I will be focusing in 3 countries, but it is true that mass surveillance is quite similar, or the trends are quite similar everywhere in the Western world. And I'd say this is also thanks to the presence of many Western corporations in countries from the global South. Mass surveillance isn't new, you know, submitting groups of population to indiscriminate surveillance. And this is systematically impinging on their right to privacy and intimacy and all of the related rights, such as the right to of expression, protest, and opinion out in the streets and at home. As I was saying, mass surveillance isn't new, but there are certain trends and dynamics that historically we hadn't seen before. And this is also because the advance of digital technology in recent decades have paved the way to allow states to control the whole of the population without any real resistance to this surveillance. Before, we could say that governments spied on specific targets, but now with today's technology, they have all of the equipment and the justification to control us all, and anyone can be a suspect. Nobody is free of this mass surveillance. And I was saying that there are certain trends that have strengthened this dynamic, such as the 9/11 terrorist attacks, which were used to justify the fact that everyone can be suspicious of embarking on terrorist activities, so they justify controlling everyone. And it brings in a false dilemma between freedom and security. It's false, I say, because without freedom and rights, there's no possible freedom. They bring in the idea that in order to ensure greater security, we must accept a cutback in our rights. And this coincides with a time where neoliberalism is rapidly expanding, and this public-private partnership, the closer links between public administrations and technology corporations have a very relevant paper in the expansion and deployment of these technologies. It's vital to understand mass surveillance, not just because corporations are the ones generating the knowledge and technology that allow this surveillance to happen, but also because at the end of the day, the data that government organizations need can only be Yes, sorry, I'm just giving you some background. Sorry, we didn't hear the other intervention. It was off mic. So as I was saying, there are two more recent trends which have allowed for mass surveillance to expand. One thing is smart cities, this concept that cities are scenarios that are prone to deploy technologies for automation and progress, which are leading to a mass gathering of our activities of our bodies. And the other fact that has helped to speed up the deployment of these technologies and to give them social legitimacy has been the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. As Naomi Klein has said in the Doctrine of Shock, a moment of exceptional crisis allows governments to push exceptional measures that wouldn't be possible in other contexts. And we saw this happen with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has increased even further the dependence of public administrations on these technologies of mass surveillance because of the need to control and make sure that people respected lockdown measures and social distancing. So this has led to an expansion of facial recognition technologies, the use of drones, which were already used before in demonstrations, for instance, in the Mobile World Congress in 2018, they were used. Also during the pandemic, they used drones to detect temperature, for instance, to see if people in the street had a fever. These technologies have increased in places like in Madrid, or COVID-19 tracking apps, which had quite an obvious use when it came to monitoring the pandemic, but at the same time, they were gathering huge amounts of data on our everyday life.
No són implementades, en aquest cas, per exemple, per
In most of the cases, these technologies are not implemented by companies in the field of healthcare. This could be reasonable, of course, but oftentimes it is companies that participate in the field of, for example, defense, or many of them are in the world, in the conference, and even for companies with origins in territories in conflict, or even occupied, like companies in Israel or companies with connections to Israel that are a part of a business that is extremely polemical, and they also are prosecuting social movements, not just in Palestine, but we have seen the case of Pegasus, but all around the world, protests are being, surveyed and fought against. So the project, mass surveillance project, or this report that we conducted, what it does is to detect and analyze technologies that within the framework of the pandemic have been used even more. They were used before, but in the pandemic, they received state support and they have expanded in 3 countries in particular: France, Spain, and the United Kingdom. In France, the pandemic was an excuse, and this was also an excuse in Spain and the UK. It was an excuse to deploy drones with facial recognition that have been used to survey or monitor some demonstrations. This has happened in France, and this is reinforcing police forces. And this is a trend in the 3 countries, but if we analyze other European countries, we would probably find this trend. In cities like Nice or Paris for the Olympic Games, there are being experimental pilot projects to use video cameras with facial recognitions in the public space. And in the United Kingdom, the police force is using this in the field of terrorism fights, but also with data mining, with devices like mobile phones, tablets, computers, with the devices that they get. And in the Spanish state, this also happens. The police in the Western world, they use a technology, a software called Celebrite, which is from an Israeli an Israeli company. And these technologies can recover data from third-party servers, and even private companies that work for the British police can do some hacking of messaging services like Telegram, for example. And there is no law in the United Kingdom that restricts the use of facial recognition. It has also been used for the mass detention of protesters who participated in a demonstration in Cardiff, in Wales, etc. So drones have also been used, and MC catchers, which are false telecom towers that are intercepting messages and communications, have also been used against demonstrators, for example, for environmental protests that have been persecuted. And in the Spanish state, we have detected some technologies. I mean, I will only explain them very quickly, but the state hacking has been using, for example, the Pegasus software, which is linked to Israel, to an Israeli company. And what it does is it obtains instant messaging data from computers, but also from devices. And in theory, this software could only be sold to governments. So even if the Spanish state has denied it, Privacy International, which is an organization that works in the field of privacy against this type of software, disclosed a case of spying that was done by governments, and one of the governments involved was the Spanish state that was surveying some politicians like Roger Torrents in this independent movement in Catalonia or others, and then phishing software used by police to do some research on activists, or the expansion of video surveillance cameras and the possibilities they now include, because we always had for many decades some video cameras, but now they include a software like facial recognition, but also they can read its driving license and so on and so forth. And this can be used against all type of groups, even ethnical or religious groups, and also the detection of what they call suspicious behavior. This could be technologies detecting, for example, people running on the street. And of course, they fail a lot, because you can be jogging or running due to any reason, because you have an emergency, or you can be dancing, and these type of technologies will fail. In a concert, for example, people dancing are detected as people having a suspicious behavior. So this type of technology is, of course, a problem now with the pandemic. For example, there is a Catalan startup that used the context of the COVID-19 pandemic to introduce a product, a technology that enables surveillance of crowds, for example, like people on the beaches of Barcelona, to make sure whether they were respecting social distance and whether they were using face masks. But again, there are also some Chinese companies using drones. These had already been used in the Mobile World Congress 4 years ago, but these drones have also been used to survey demonstrations or political actions, like an action that took place in the Camp Nou. That was an event where drones were used. False antennas that are what we call MC catchers, but also telephone mining, data mining tools when the police is trying to do some research, they use it. And this is also being used in the borders with asylum seekers, to make sure that asylum seekers come from the country they say they come from, and to analyze their devices. Many police agents use this technology that comes from Israel. And besides this, there is also the matter of facial recognition in general, and also biometrics. Despite the fact that there is no regulation framework that has been implemented yet and that is strong enough, it is now being deployed in a widespread way. It has been used in airports for a long time now, but some private companies are also using it, like a supermarket chain called Mercadona in Spain that has been using this software, and they have been fined because they are not respecting the data protection acts. And border surveillance, there was a system with 66 facial recognition enabled cameras in the borders developed by a company called Thales, but also a company called Unevo that is conducting other projects in Barcelona that are normally social projects, but with the border surveillance, they are conducting all these sort of projects. So with regards to facial recognition, even if this type of technology is blatantly infringing or breaking some fundamental rights, it is still there. I mean, what this biometrics does is to analyze your body and identify you through things. I mean, we are already familiar with this with the fingerprint, but in other countries where this has not been implemented, this is a battle. And of course, now there is iris recognition softwares, even DNA, many recognition software that allow to identify people by using something that is as private as your body, and in this case for surveillance purposes. In Catalonia, we have a company called ERTA that is participating in a project funded by the European Union and the European Fund for Regional Development, which is a surveillance and monitoring system based on artificial intelligence and facial recognition that will develop algorithms to identify strange behaviors, but this technology will be at the service of police and other security forces that have been funding this technology for a while now. This technology is also being applied for the European borders ever since 2017, when there was a smart border control project. They started using these biometric data collection technologies, and at the end of 2022, a new technology will be implemented to control the arrival of people coming from outside of the European Union through biometric data that will be kept in the system for 3 to 5 years. And again, surveillance of refugees is also a problem. And this is a volume of 400 million people whose sensitive data will be disclosed and will be given to all these companies and to governments. So the fact that your data are managed by a company or by a government, we can think that ethically government management is better, but as a matter of fact, it is a problem anyway, because it can be used against some ethnical groups, some religious groups, and so on and so forth. Thank you. Okay, we will try to explore some of the topics you raised further, but now I would like to do something else. I would like to ask Aisha, if that is possible, if she can explain the experience of Africtivists, your experience and the experience of Africtivists when it comes to using digital tools, in particular to strengthen the civil society, to promote democracy in a better way.
Thank you, Carlos. Hi, Nora, and hi, everyone who is in the room in Barcelona. I would have loved to be there with you, sending you some warm sunshine from Dakar. So Africtivist is an organization, a Pan-African organization based in Dakar. We work to strengthen democracy, good governance, human rights through information and communication technologies. And in addition to that, we advocate for participatory democracy and based on enhanced citizenship, especially in African countries. We do this by defending fundamental human rights, including the right to access to information, freedom of expression, and access to internet. So you can see there's technology in general has a big, is a big part of what we do in Africtivists. We're in 40 countries and we have 400 members all over the continent. Technology is a tool, and for us, we use it positively, tech for development, tech for good, because any tool actually could be bad or good depending on how you use it. And what Nora just said in her introduction shows that you know, there is another side of the coin in the use of technology. And all this actually comes back to one thing. Governments are trying to control their people, have more control over people. Companies are, you know, these tech companies are more looking into their interests, be it financial or anything else. And it comes down to the responsibility of each and every one to use technology and you know, by respecting basic human rights in the use of our data for the tech companies or government organization. So to talk about technology to promote democracy, we have seen Africa and African civil society organization grow actually as more and more platforms online developed from, it started more with towards 2010, and the big 2007, if I can go back to the crisis in Kenya and when Ushahidi was used as a medium to be able to indicate where places of where there were issues with where there were crises actually for people to avoid it. And recently I learned that Ushahidi, that same system that was developed by Kenyans, was used in Spain during the COVID, you know, during the COVID response. And that shows that there's this interconnection between, you know, the North and the West and the South, or the old South. And as Nora said earlier, she mentioned about Pegasus, and there's some African countries actually where that system is being used and it's having a negative impact on mostly opponents, dissidents, and journalists. So what we do at Africtivist, everything we do, as I said earlier, is use technology, ICT tools to bring the citizen closer to the governing be it an elected official or a government. The bottom line for us is for citizens to have a bigger say in how things are run, because many decisions are being made on their behalf, and most of the time they don't even know what are the deals and the agreements that are signed. So we have a big chunk of our work that includes cybersecurity, because we need to protect our data. We need to circumvent surveillance, of course. And yeah, we've been doing that. And another part also, we've been using technology actually to have a more transparent electoral process, including technology, be it a mobile app or a website with maps and everything, to show the results of an elections and make sure that technology is included in the electoral observation process of a country. Another example I can give, which is a little bit basic, the war in Ukraine, we've seen Africans suffer discrimination because of their race. And the fact that there was an outcry on social media African governments have reacted and they're trying to coordinate the response and the support to people on the ground. And also we see that the African Union has issued a statement regarding that. So if it was not because of technology, issues like this could have happened, but there was proof of video, of photos of people being blocked at the Polonese border just because of the color of their skin, or just because they're from Africa. I'm not complaining, but that's the reality we are in the world. And technology actually has created somehow a level playing field for Africans in general, in whichever sector. So now it depends how you use it. We in our organization and others and similar organizations, civil society, have decided to use it for good, for our citizens, our fellow citizens to be more aware. We recently implemented a project in 4 African countries in their local governments, 7 local governments in 4 African countries. And the purpose actually was to increase citizen participation and the discussion between elected officials and citizens using technologies, very simplified systems, because we understand there is a technology divide, a digital divide, if I can say, and the technological infrastructure are not everywhere. We are very aware of the surveillance that our government are doing, and we are also trying to find ways to protect the data we have, because civil society sometimes has sensitive data, and those data are very crucial in consolidating democracy. So that was just an introduction to for me to present my organization and talk about the other side of the coin, how we are using technologies to have positive impact on our communities' lives. Over.
Moltes gràcies, Aisha.
Thanks so much, Aisha. I would like to ask Nora, with regards to the introduction we just heard of this research paper, I'd like to ask you, you mentioned, Nora, that many of these technologies and measures had been used in the past, but that now they've found an excuse or a pretext to use them. To what extent are these technologies and measures legal or illegal, or is there no regulation over them? How can we defend ourselves from that? Well, many of these measures, in fact, are legal, but with some caveats. I mean, they are legal, for instance, if the citizens are informed of their use. It's different for technologies that are used in public spaces and technologies to control communications. From a legal stance, it is true that in the case of technologies that are used in public spaces, it's legal with certain caveats, as long as the European data protection regulation is met and the Spanish data protection law is observed. So here they'd be used legally, but then there's the whole issue of transparency on how these data are used, who manages these data, and how these data are being used. And that's what we are asking about with regards to the right to privacy. And the discussions are just starting in this sense here in Spain. And with regards to facial recognition, it's a different matter altogether. It is true that communications can only be tapped if there is a court order, and we know this isn't always the case. So there is some illegality happening there. It's difficult to prove that illegal actions were committed. And in the case for facial recognition, it is a battle, because in this regard, the battle is slightly different. It is true that there is a discussion among citizens on facial recognition technology, and these technologies are being used, and they have been used in demonstrations in Catalonia, and we suspect that the Catalan regional police use these facial recognition technology because, I don't know, when you have 120 people who are arrested in a demonstration, what lawyers tell us is that it's very difficult to identify all of these people without these type of facial recognition technology. It would take years. So there's a suspicion that the Catalan police use cameras in their vehicles and drones that use facial recognition technology. And it's a lot more controversial in terms of regulation. The UN, for instance, in September called for a moratorium on states with regards to regulating these technologies so that there's sufficient time to not just assess the risks these technologies pose to the right to privacy, but how it reproduces patriarchal and racist patterns, you know, because these facial recognition technologies have a clear racial and gender-based bias and could lead to discrimination. And then also the people who interpret the data also have these racial and gender biases. So United Nations asked the Human Rights Commissioner to regulate these facial recognition technologies, but not to use them yet. So they called for a moratorium on facial recognition technology and artificial intelligence. And also in the European Union, in April 2021, a draft directive on artificial intelligence was proposed to guarantee security and rights through the use of this technology to, we could say, so-called strengthen the safeguards and look at the risks it poses in terms of human rights respect. If they covering aspects like whether or not they should be used when there are minors involved, and creating 4 different levels of risk. And this directive leaves out military use of these technologies, and somehow it includes safeguards so that this technology needs to be highly regulated and shouldn't be used except for security matters. When it comes to security or emergencies, then it opens the door to an arbitrary use of these technologies. And what we are calling for from the activist movement is to have a stronger regulation to specify in which cases these technologies should be able to use and have control mechanisms. And then also in October, the European Parliament issued a statement saying there should be a human control of decisions taken by algorithms, predictive behavior techniques when they're used by the police, for instance, by predicting crime. They use technology with algorithms that take certain crimes, the crimes that are strictly linked to security, like robbery, crimes relating to public health. They won't be looking for white-collar crimes. And then they come up with statistics on neighborhoods where there's greater crime, which tend to be marginalized neighborhoods, and it stigmatizes them even further. And then automatic recognition shouldn't be used in public spaces or borders. That's what the European Parliament called for. In Spain, basically, they will follow the EU regulations, but we have laws in Spain that try regulating the use of these technologies. The digital gag law, which allows intervening internet connections. It may not be so concerning in terms of facial recognition, but it does pose a threat. And then there are other resolutions from July 2020, for instance, that allows law enforcement agencies to use facial recognition in mass events or in airports, for instance. So in this regards, there isn't a strong regulation in Spain with regards to facial recognition, but it is, we understand that when the European directive is implemented, it will then have to be transposed in the different member states. But these technologies are also already being used. And I think it was in 2021, there was a scandal because the Spanish railway company put out to tender services for a surveillance system, and they wanted it to classify the users by their ethnic origin, the way they dressed. And when this tender was published, it was a big scandal. So at the end, they had to withdraw this public tender. So there's a lot to be done. Let's keep this part of the reactions to the second part. And now I'd like to ask Aisha, based on your experience with your multifaceted activism, what kind of tools can be used in the digital world for all of the, how can you integrate these digital tools in the different fields of activism, for instance, for accountability purposes or to promote transparency or in feminist struggles that you're also involved in? What kind of digital tools can you use in all of these different struggles? Thank you.
Okay, I'm writing down the question, so I'll respond. You want, okay. How can digital tools be integrated into, for instance, transparency? I will give an example of elections that I talked about earlier. A concrete example was on December 4th, 2021, Gambia, which is the smallest country on the African continent, the mainland Africa, held its first open democratic elections, you know, in over 22 years. That's since the end of the dictatorship. So for transparency, civil society organizations and put in place, work together to have what we call regularly election observers. These are members of the civil society who will go to polling stations to make sure that people have, you know, that materials have arrived on time, that people are voting without any issues and everything is going on well, and they will feed that information into you know, tablet with a sheet, and that information will be sent to the situation room in the capital. So these people are foremost non-partisan. They don't belong to any political party. And their role was just to make sure that to observe and then send information. And after that, the information is treated at the situation room. That's where, you know, all the data are collected, verified, because there are data analysts who will make sure that the information that's being sent is correct. And if there are issues, they will call and you know, make sure everything is aligned before uploading it on the platform, which was a platform as a mobile application called Mabu, and the other one was a website. And people, Gambia has a big diaspora, and people in the diaspora could not participate in this election, the last presidential election. So it was a mobile app as Mabu helped them actually monitor what was going on, what time people voted, how many people voted, and the data were parallel being collated in the situation room, but we could not go public with those information because according to law, you know, only the Independent Electoral Commission has the right to officially declare results. Even if, you know, results are posted on the doors of polling stations, you do not have the right to publicly share that information. So when they started there was an issue actually that some members of the opposition claimed that the elections were not transparent and rigged, civil society organizations came out, who have been doing work on the ground for months, came out and said, yes, there are minor issues and problems that happen, but these elections were free and fair and transparent. And the minor issues that we noted do not have any impact on the outcome of the results. This is because civil society has done its work, has used technology, and has built a confidence, and through transparency, there was not that much of a post-election crisis in the country. So that's a way of using these tools for transparency. And it's also a way for accountability, civil society being accountable to citizens at large by publishing all the results and the information they had per polling station and per region. That's one example. If I want to give an example on technology being used for, civic engagement, there is a mobile app also, again, most of these apps actually are they don't use a lot of data because internet data is very expensive in Africa. So when we are building the application, we make sure that the person who is using the application will not have to pay too much to be able to download and use this app. So this is an organization based in Benin that's also working with us. They're part of our members, and they've put in place a mobile app that will, walk you through how you can get involved as a citizen in the running of your country or in a democratic process, what it means to be a committed or an engaged citizen or active citizen, as some people say. I will give an example of in the health sector of an application we developed this at Africtivis. We developed an audio application during COVID, and the purpose for this application was to provide factual information to the general public. The application is Media Scoop. It's still available, and it shares information that debunks misinformation on COVID, because at the beginning there was a lot of misinformation going on. People had difficulties understanding, I'm thinking like all over the world, what this disease was. And there was a lot of people who through WhatsApp were feeding wrong information. So Media Scoop with an audio that you can just play is very light. You play it and it continue playing from one section to the other and give you the information you need when it comes to news, health, which sectors, where you need to go to get information or get treated for COVID, where you can go to get tested, and also the possibility actually of having a one-on-one with a doctor. And this in Wolof, which is the most spoken language in Senegal. And this application also was used in the most remote areas, because what we did was we raised awareness, by word of mouth with people who are in far away areas that do not necessarily have access to information and did not really know what was going on. And they would use the app every day to listen to the updates on the cases, but also to get the right information. And we had focal points in some of these countries, in some of these communities who would, listen to the app and then hold community discussion to share the information with the rest of the group. I'll come back to COVID, because COVID actually, we've seen how that there's creativity. We've always known there's creativity, but others have seen that there's enough creativity and talent in Africa, and there's enough committed young people who are not waiting for authorities to give them resources to be able to implement something. So in 2019, 2020, what we did is we did a mapping of youth initiatives on COVID, just to show the how you can use technology actually to do good, because all of these different young people, individually or organization, have used technology to contribute to fighting COVID. So I would say all these things that have been done by people individually has contributed to making sure that Africa is not a disaster that everyone hoped it would be during COVID. Another technology, which is a VoIP WhatsApp. It's not always negative. WhatsApp also has helped actually share proper information, because individually what we were doing, we are in many groups. When you see misinformation in a group, you correct it and you make sure that you don't share it further. So these are some of the actions I can just mention. There are others on technology for education, technology for fashion, for you know, there's a mobile app actually that helps you as an agriculture, if you are a farmer or you are a fisherman or you are a herder, to get information on the weather, and that helps you, you know, decide, for instance, for a fisherman, if you should go at sea or not. And you can call in as well, because always when a system is developed, we always include that aspect that is more accessible, which could be SMS, or you call in and the voice will tell you that in the language that you speak, that this is the information that's being shared. It's not safe to go at sea at this time because, you know, it's dangerous. Or for the farmer, this is the time between you can sow your seed because it will rain from this period to this period, etc. So there are tons and tons of examples that, you know, that we've been, when I say we, it's not just my organization, it's not just our organization, Africtivists, and our members, it goes beyond us. It's other organizations that are all over the continent and that are doing the same work. We all agree on one thing: technology and the digital revolution, or the fourth revolution, is an opportunity for Africa, and we want to make sure that we are not left behind. We are doing everything possible to make sure that we are not left behind in every single sector. The only problem we have is the other side, where, you know, states are the one who should make sure that the infrastructures are in place and the whole country is covered. They should be the one who make sure that the prices of access to internet is affordable to everyone. It should not be a luxury to have access to internet. It is a human right, and that should be made effective. And state also should, you know, tone down its control and, you know, heavy-handedness when it comes to what's happening on internet and how people are using technology. Of course, there is, you know, negative effects on that, especially when it comes to violence against women and girls online. Women suffer a lot about that, and that has nothing to do with any country or any continent. It's across the world. We are the biggest victim of online bullying because it gets worse when it's a woman involved, and the repercussion could lead sometimes to dangerous situations and people being attacked. So if only we could have head of states who would do what they should do, instead of passing laws that, you know, criminalize a lot of things that's happening online. Of course, cybercrime is a problem, but we have the Maputo Convention on cybersecurity and data protection that was passed by the African Union, but we are yet to have it as an active convention, because the threshold of 15 countries ratifying the convention, we have not reached that threshold of 15 countries yet. And so they're passing laws that are not in conformity with a protocol that they approved during an African Union summit. So those are the discrepancies we have to work with, but we are hopeful and positive, and we will continue to focus on making sure that we use technology for good, but also protecting ourselves from the threat that come from these governments. Over.
Muchas gracias. No sé si, Claudia, no sé si...
Thank you very much, Aisha. I do not know if we have any more questions, Claudia. Well, we are accepting one question from the audience. Please, a very short answer, because I would also like to ask a question myself before we finish this panel, okay? The microphone should be used, or we cannot translate the questions. Now, okay. Maybe this is not a question, but it's just a thought I would like to share with you. What I have seen here is like, I was expecting a speech about technology in the service of life and how technologies are impacting our everyday lives. I was expecting something like Facebook, the attention span problems, and so on. But this has been focusing on freedom. I mean, maybe that it has been called technologies at the service of freedom, because I have the feeling that when technologies are regulated by governments, all of a sudden, some things that are convenient for us can become like face recognition to identify ourselves, a technology, a contactless technology, for example, that allows me to pay easily. When the government controls it, they control my economic situation without my consent. And there are so many examples that at the end of the day, they all come down, they boil down to freedom. Technology, everything around us is technology. So this is just, food for thought. I mean, there is a discussion that revolves around freedom, but also governments using technology for their own personal users to control people, to provide some services to citizens. But then we also have private companies offering services that have an ethical position, like, for example, attention span problems. I was expecting some information about it, but I just wanted to share with you this thought, like, how can we be so much controlled? And all this surveillance, aren't we so vulnerable? Because technology is used for purposes that we cannot decide. And this was just something I wanted to share with you. Yeah, but in any case, the fact that we talk about technologies at the service of life without freedom, life becomes something else. So in a way, it's a fundamental aspect to life, isn't it? Yeah, I would like to say that technology on itself is just a tool. As our colleague Aisha was saying, this technology can be used very positively for democracy, for many other things that are good for us. Digital rights, at the end of the day, are a part of our struggles. We are struggling, we are fighting to ensure digital rights, and to avoid infringements upon our rights. But it's technology that has to be at the service of life. But if the system itself is not at the service of life, then of course, some technologies are developed that can be at the service of democracy, that can be, really interesting for cities, technologies that allow us to decide in a more participatory way. Healthcare technologies, there are so many services that can be used for care, for healthcare, but we belong to the system we belong. And there's this other side of the coin. So I'm not asking for technologies to be forbidden, of course not. This is not a demand that I support. What I would like, what we request, is to have some warranties and to also have some accountability when it comes to the infringement of human rights, and also the awareness of privacy and everything it entails. Information, data are now a commodity. They have economic value. So this privacy, we have to fight to get it back, okay? Yeah. So this is a personal decision, but I would like to finish this panel, which is a very privileged panel because we have an activist with us, an expert, a local expert, but also an expert in the global south. So an expert in the global north and the global south. So I think that this is the perfect context. I would like to finish in a constructive way with a positive note. So I would like to ask both Nora and Aisha something in just 1 minute because we're running out of time. But what do you think are the spaces where we can all find some solidarity leverage, some ways of working together, cooperating with the civil society in the north and in the south, considering that the threats are there for all of us. The threats are the same, the dangers are the same, but even aggressors are the same. So how can we find ways to cooperate and work together in the North and South civil society? You start and then Aisha, please. Yeah, I think that many of these technologies have been implemented within a colonial context. And they have also been used against the population. So some populations implemented by the global north have been used against the population of the south and against the population in the north, and also against the people coming from the south. So with this neo-colonialism that we are living, so this link between the north and the south in the matter is totally there. I mean, I believe that the responsibility towards this anti-colonial struggle begins by controlling, fighting all these colonial practices by companies, by the northern countries, with things such as the manifesto we made some months ago within this framework of global rights, because we wanted to advocate for privacy against all this implementation of biometric technologies in the Spanish borders. So these technologies coming from companies in our city or funded by our own governments are developing now systems that attacked directly the rights of people from the global south. So I think that there is a very clear link, and that we all have to be responsible and accountable, because the European population has to be protected, but this shouldn't be to the detriment of other populations. So they shouldn't even be object of that. Aisha, in just 1 minute, please. How do you think that we can create these bonds of collaboration, cooperation?
I think fora like this ones are an opportunity to create those links, and the existing links, and this one is specifically on keeping the internet on, which is Keep It On coalition. It's countries from all over the world, and we support each other in campaigning for each other to make sure that there's no internet shutdown. I think the solutions actually, that we are facing the same problems at different level, and most of these surveillance technologies, or these bad technologies, where I can use those words, are first tested in Africa without a population knowing before going to the Western world. So maybe a solution could be, more engagement, more collaboration, and more campaigns and solutions and advocacy, because I think when advocacy are being done about rights, it's everyone's right, so it should be as inclusive as possible. And the different forum I've been participating in Europe or Africa have been opportunities for us to exchange on that. And the other problem actually we have, Nora mentioned, I know you told me 1 minute, but when I start, I can't stop, but I will finish with that. Nora spoke about this colonial aspect of things when it comes to technology. There's some of our personal data, identification information that are, handed over to third-party companies that are either Europeans or from Asia, and they're the one registering us, taking all our fingerprints, the retina, all the personal information, and we don't know what they're doing with it. We don't know if the government that signed a contract even know how the information is being used. So technology is fast, And I think everyone is not keeping the pace because it's difficult to keep the pace, but at least the basic human rights should be respected, be it from the north or from the south. And as you know, Carlos, we always open to collaboration. We will collaborating, we've been sharing solutions in terms of data protection, cybersecurity, tips, etc. So I think that's the way forward for the world, actually, if we don't want to continue losing all the basic human rights that we have already. Over.
Bueno, crec que Nora y Aisha...
Nora and Aisha showed us a way forward. And it is a beautiful way of finishing with this message. This is the way, with the information we have, that's the only thing we can do. I believe that we now have to just be grateful for their speeches with a huge round of applause. Thank you so much.
Doncs bé, moltes gràcies a tots i a totes.
Thank you all for your participation, for attending this. If you're in the audience, but also if you're following us online for this electronic MODEC that can be fair. Thank you to our attendees, everybody watching us, and also to the City Council of Barcelona and the whole team of this fantastic Moragues venue in Born. Please allow me to say that this is possible thanks to SETEM Catalonia, with this campaign, fostering dialogue, fostering these messages that we've been hearing today, the use of technology, the use of the electric and electronic industry in a positive way. There are so many problems and we need to find alternatives. We need to find ways to improve it, to make it better. Thank you all. And I would like to extend my thanks to everyone that are helping us, technically speaking, the simultaneous translators, but also the technical team. And our mobile conference finishes here, but it will also continue in some institutes talking about the impact of this industry and nothing else. If you would like to share all these materials, they will be available at the website of SETEM, and we encourage you to review all this. Without further ado, I would like to finish by saying a huge thanks to everybody. Thank you.